Hello there, everybody. Welcome to the third video in my vlog series. We are out in the Greytown area. We've got family that farm out here over the Easter weekend. So been able to enjoy some time out on the trails and not having to pound some tarmac so much. And the weather has dried up a little bit. So although it's very muddy, could actually get out there this morning. Today, I want to talk about the types of workouts that you should be trying to do in your preparation for Comrades to get your body accustomed to the load that you're going to putting yourself under on Comrades Day. So yeah, there's just a couple of specifics. Obviously, I'm not going to speak too much about the way to structure your training program, but being an endurance event, there is no substitute for mileage. That's a long told tale. The more mileage you can do, generally, the better you are going to cope in an ultra marathon. It really isn't about speed that much, although I will speak about the importance of speed work. It does actually contribute to your endurance. But yeah, there are some specifics. I will have to just kind of give a skeleton of a training framework, but there are some specifics that I do feel that you can look for when dealing with an event of this type, with the topography of this type, with the elevation gain and loss, and having to build tolerance towards that. And I've already mentioned a little bit about the downhill running technique. So let's go ahead now, and I will share my screen, and we'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Right, so that's where we want to be, talking about heart rate zones today. And why are they important? Well, the importance of heart rate zones is that they tell you how you are using energy, and they tell you how much exercise load that there is, and you can derive from that how long it's going to take to recover. And you do need both of those sets of information, because as you'll see now, an hour spent running isn't just an hour spent running. Sometimes it's going to take you a very long time to recover from an hour out there, depending on how hard you were going. And then on the right, obviously, I've just got some examples of different sessions. I'm not going to refer to those today, but you can see there are very different types of sessions using different effort levels. So I do use slightly different heart rate zones from these thresholds, from these different kind of cutoff values. I use percentage of maximum heart rate, but the most widely used is just to use percentage of your maximum heart rate. So zone 1 starts at 50%. When you're below that, you're not really doing anything at a high enough level to achieve any kind of benefit. So you start at 50% of maximum heart rate, and zone 1 is 50 to 60%. That is very, very easy. You'll recover very quickly from that. It's very light. You'll be able to talk easily, and you won't even really be raising a sweat, and you'll be able to carry on almost all day, regardless of how fit you are. Zone 2 goes from 60 to 70%. It's still quite easy, but there is a little bit more, you are introducing a little bit more load. It will make you fitter a little bit quicker than zone 1 as a result of that. But it is 100% aerobic. That means you are using your aerobic system. If you remember learning about that at high school life sciences or biology, that's aerobic respiration, where you process your energy sources, glucose, and you use that system to produce the type of energy, which is ATP. If you remember, it is adenosine triphosphate, which is the source of energy that all cells use, all organisms use it. And on Comrades Day, you're going to want to spend most of your day actually in that zone, because you can do that for a very long time. Training wise, that is the zone at which you are going to be getting stronger. Your muscles are going to be getting stronger. They're going to be getting more efficient. Same with your heart. Your heart is a muscle. Your breathing, the mechanics of your breathing are going to be getting more efficient. So you're going to be building up strength and endurance in all of the systems that you use as an endurance athlete in that zone. And therefore, you're going to want to spend most of your time training in that zone, because that's, as long as you allow enough recovery in between sessions, that is what's going to build all of those systems and make you fitter and make you stronger, make you more resilient. I spoke about riding a jackhammer. That's what's going to make all of those tissues that are resistant to the load cope on race day, and get you to the end of the day. Then as we move into zone 3, that's from 70 to 80%. It's still an aerobic zone. It gets a couple of different names, so I didn't really want to use any one name there. But you are your anaerobic system is just starting to kick in very slowly in this zone. So if you stay at around 70%, it'll still be all your aerobic system. But the anaerobic system, what that means is that your aerobic system is operating at 100% of its capacity, but your body is still placing an energy demand, and you're having to produce energy using another pathway, which is obviously oxygen isn't available, so therefore it is anaerobic. So it does produce a little bit more energy, but the payback, or the negative behind it, is that you start to produce lactate. Now, lactate is a very difficult metabolite to metabolize. It actually requires oxygen to metabolize it. But remember, while you're exercising, your aerobic system is using 100% of whatever oxygen you're taking in to provide energy. So if you continue to exercise, there is no oxygen available to try and break that lactate down, and it accumulates. When lactate accumulates, it makes your muscles feel heavy. It is lactic acid, so your muscles become the kind of fluid inside your muscles becomes acidic, and that impairs the function of the muscles as well. And so that's, when you're doing a hard session, an interval session or whatever, or you running around on a rugby field and you run really hard, that's the feeling of the burning that you will be familiar with. That's why you get it. And then when you take a rest, then you get a chance to metabolize it and take it away. It's a lot more difficult to metabolize lactic acid than the carbon dioxide is your byproduct of aerobic respiration. And carbon dioxide diffuses around pretty easily, and your circulatory system is pretty good at getting rid of it, and you just breathe it out. It's very easy to dispense of, but the products of anaerobic respiration are a lot more difficult to get rid of, and that's why you need longer recovery. As soon as you start to kick that system in, it requires longer recovery. So that starts to happen in zone 3, and in zone 4, that is when you go well beyond your aerobic system. We call it speed tolerance. It burns when you get into that zone because of this high production of lactate. Although it does produce a little bit of extra energy, you produce energy at a much lower rate than you do when you are using your aerobic system. It produces 17 times less energy than your aerobic system does for the same source of fuel. So you tend to use up your kind of fuel tank very quickly if you start to use the anaerobic system. And the reason that it burns is, as I've said, that lactic acid that hangs around afterwards. And your exercise duration therefore has to be pretty short. Zone 5, that's your kind of eyeballs out stuff. As endurance athletes, we don't, it'll be pretty silly to actually get into that zone because you're not going to last very long at all. That's your, very short, very high intensity. A lot of athletes that use this zone, they don't even activate the aerobic system. Your sprinters and jumping athletes and that kind of thing. But your 400 and 800 meter athletes, they are using this system. Somebody like a 1500 meter runner, they're using a combination between zone 4 and zone 5. So you can't even stay in zone 5 for long enough to complete that length of race. Olympic swimmers, for example, like a 50-meter freestyle, if you watch the final of the Olympics, certainly in the men, all of the guys that are lined up in the final, they will dive in the pool and they will not breathe, and they will swim to the other side, obviously very quickly, very short duration, but that just tells you they're not breathing because they don't need oxygen. They are fully using the anaerobic system, and they'll be sitting in that zone as well. So that's what you get from your heart rate zones. It tells you what energy system you're using, and that's how you calculate how long it takes to recover. So, and recovery is very important in training. You don't get fitter while you are training. Training breaks you down. You adapt to whatever load that you are applying and get fitter while recovering in between sessions. So you need to make sure that you are not applying too much load. And therefore, the scheduling and planning of rest is really well worth making a bit of effort over. And there are two types of sessions that you really need to think about when you are scheduling your recovery. So at the bottom of the screen on the bottom right, I've got a really long run. So you can see that I spent most of my time in zone 1 and zone 2, but because that's a really long session, I think that one was about 2 hours, just over 2 hours and 40 minutes. Because it's long, although it's all zone 1 and zone 2, because it's long, the load does accumulate and you need to have some rest scheduled after that. Then the one at the top of the screen, just above where my little talk box is, that's a really short session. That session I think was only about 40 or 45 minutes, but just look at how much zone 3 and zone 4 there is, and the load as a result of that is pretty high, although it's a pretty short session. So you need to plan your training week so that you'll get some time to recover after a session like that. And then your other sessions, those are the ones that you can kind of do back to back without really having to worry too much about it. But you do need to think about and schedule rest and try and get the most out of your recovery that you can. So that, and obviously you need to pay attention to your sleep as well. So let's just go now and we'll look at a couple of different types of sessions. So the most important type of workout is your long, slow distance workout. As an endurance athlete, this really is your bread and butter. You're going to be spending a lot of time in zone 1, but that is maybe a little bit too slow to spend too long in that zone. It should be mostly zone 2, which, as I said, has a slightly different benefit. It does help your tissues get stronger and helps your systems get more efficient, and it happens a lot quicker than it does in zone 1, which is why you really want to try and not spend too much time in zone 1 and most of your time in zone 2. The key here is that it allows for recovery. If you're doing a longer session, you really are going to need time. So if you go too hard, it's going to take too long to recover. And if you're having to take 2 and 3 rest days after a long session, you're losing out on mileage the following week if you've done it on a weekend. So the first guy who really his name is tagged onto this type of training is Phil Maffetone. As I said, there is no substitute for mileage. You'll hear guys talking about the Maffetone method. That's where you just stay at a very, very low heart rate and you don't do any interval work. You don't pick it up at all. And you just do as many miles as you can with as low load as you can for those sessions, recover as quickly as you can, and just pile in the mileage. Now, that's not necessarily the most effective way of training, but it really does work for a lot of people because of that recovery happening quicker. As I said, there is no substitute for mileage. That is the most important thing when structuring a training program. And most of your training during an ultra prep should be these types of runs. You can see the run that I've got up on the screen. That was the run that I got back from the other day when I was standing out in the rain in the driveway. It was only my second long run. It felt pretty tough. But you can see the white line is my average, and I really am trying to keep that average down. I spoke a little bit in the previous video about the characteristics of the terrain that you want to try and look for when you're doing these types of runs. So there is my elevation. This was a run that was done out onto the Comrades route and then out towards Cowie's Hill, and then I turned around at Cowie's Hill. So you can see I'm really climbing through the first half, doing a lot of climbing, and then it flattened out a little bit through Westville, and you can see my heart rate is a little bit higher than my average heart rate through the first half because I'm having to climb. I'm also having to toe off a little bit harder to lift myself up those hills. And then what I'm doing is I'm coming downhill in the second half of the run, and especially when you do this early in a training program, you simulate what it feels like on an ultra. So this run I think was only about 27 or 28 kilometers, but because I'm not that fit yet, I'm reproducing the kind of fatigue that my body will be under when I'm running a lot further than that once I get fitter. So I like to do these runs very early in a training build-up and ride that jackhammer, get really accustomed to the impact, practice the technique of running downhill. And yeah, so that's just one of the things that I do early on, and I really feel that it does help me get ready for Comrades. Then I've got circled at the end there. I live on a very steep hill, 11.5% gradient, 650 meters. And sometimes what I'll do at the end of the long run is gun it up there. And I did that this day. So you can see on the elevation that there's a little pickup at the end, and it picks my heart rate up. And you can also see that's where all of the zone 3 that I've got circled in the green comes from. And the whole run during that day, I didn't even touch that zone 3. And then it was only when I was running back up the hill towards home and really had picked up my effort level that it got up to zone 3. And because I was so fatigued, being relatively unfit early on in my training program, when I'm fresh, if I go and warm up and then go and stand at the bottom of that hill and gun it up the top, my heart rate will go through zone 3 and into zone 4. But because of fatigue, it's sort of hovered there and stayed in zone 3. So that just shows you what happens with fatigue. And not being able to get your heart rate up is a sign of fatigue. Then, yeah, so that kind of a route, it really does help you become accustomed to the demands of Comrades. They're going up and they're going down. As I said, I like to do it early, and it simulates the way that it's going to feel, and I get to practice that technique that I mentioned in the previous video of running downhill. So I did put the same graph up during that video. You can see how those colored dots are my vertical elevation. You can see how my vertical elevation average is coming down as I'm running down that hill. That is because of that downhill running technique that I was mentioning, where you make sure that you try your best and have your impact point as close to underneath your hips as possible. And you keep your hips high and you keep your hips forward and flail your feet out behind you a little bit, and you keep your running cadence up. And that allows you to come downhill with minimal impact, minimal effort as well. And it will also increase your speed, and you will learn to run downhill efficiently. That is one of the skills that trail runners are really, really good at. And it also helps you to avoid injury because your impact is a lot less, and you're just gonna be a lot kinder on your body, and you're not going to get tired nearly as quickly. There's a lot less eccentric load. So eccentric load, concentric is kind of when a muscle is shortening and contracting. Eccentric is like the down part of a squat. And if you get that downhill running technique right, then there is a lot less eccentric load, and it's really good to practice this on longer runs to simulate the kind of way that you're going to feel during an ultra. Then this is also it's a similar intensity run, but it's not nearly as long. So you can see I'm out there for just over an hour and a half, or you can see that I have had to stop for water on this one because my duration, the total duration is hour 35, but I've only actually run for just over an hour and a half. So this is a midweek run. I'm still staying in zone 1 and zone 2 only. You can see the average heart rate is only 125. My threshold between zone 1 and zone 2 is 127. So I'm still keeping that heart rate really, really low. And I'm not getting carried away. This was a group run, actually, a Wednesday morning group run that I sometimes run with the group. And it's very, very easy when you're doing a shorter run, you know, hour duration or whatever it is. It's really, really easy to get carried away and get towed around by runners who are maybe a little bit faster than you. And you start to edge into that zone 3, your metabolism starts to shift and you require longer recovery. But you don't realize it. You think, oh, I've just done a nice slow run. Look at your heart rate monitor. It doesn't lie. And you need to be careful of that intensity. It really doesn't pay you off to do that. I've had instances where on runs like this, I remember a few years ago, not exactly sure what date, but we would do, there was a public holiday in the middle of the week when this group was meeting. They decided to do either a 20 or a 25 on the day. And it started off pretty chilled. I got towed away with the group, realized I was going too hard, and then wanted to drop back at one of the water stops, but realized that the group that was behind us was so far behind that I would end up running on my own. So I just kind of stayed with the group and ended up paying for it. I think that that year I ended up getting a little bit sick after that. It took about a week or 10 days, but I really did learn a lesson from that. It really was that, it was that one single run where I did it. And I remember there was one other time I was doing a very long run. It was over 30 Ks, and I got towed away by some runners. I'm not really capable of running much faster than 9 hours at Comrades, and I got pulled away by some silver runners who, they weren't running that much harder than what I should have been running, but it was just a little bit. It was a fairly demanding and fairly hilly route, and same thing happened. There wasn't a group behind to fall back with, and I was catching them at all the water stops and having to kind of try and get going ahead of them, and then, you know, they'd overtake me, and it ended up a few days later in a calf tweak. So those are two specific instances that I can speak of from my own running career, where just one run was enough to cause a problem. And it's most common with these kind of shorter midweek runs where you do that and you drift your effort level too high. You end up in zone 3, and if you look at the statistics, it will tell you that you run too hard. Then just one thing about this, you know, group running, you do have to stop for water. You need to try and keep these sessions continuous. You do get the value out of them by doing that. So don't stop too long for water and end up with too much rest period. You know, on a run like this, I might stop sort of 2 or 3 times for water, and you end up, instead of having one continuous long session, if you stop for too long, you end up having like 3 or 4 individual sessions with a recovery break in between. So when you're in zone 1 and zone 2, you really do want it to be continuous. Right, the next style of workout, you can see is dramatically different. Here, I'm just going to cover that up. Here we are looking at an interval session. So here's where you really do go high intensity. You really only want to do this once a week as an endurance runner. Even top endurance marathon runners, they will only do interval sessions like this once a week. But sort of current wisdom of the last, I'd say maybe 15 years, is heading more and more in the direction of working through, or you've got to try and work all the way through zone 3 and get into zone 4. The reason that you're trying to do that is you're trying to maximize your aerobic capacity. So there is a bit of value in zone 3 and sitting in zone 3, but it's really not that much. You get all of that. If you can get up into zone 4, you're still going to get that value. And what you are sure of is that you are working at 100% of your aerobic capacity. And what that does, you'll often get, if you have any kind of a device that makes a comment like this, when you do a workout like this, you'll often get a comment at the end of your workout that you are improving your VO2 max. That means you are improving your aerobic capacity. So you do it once a week, and yeah, it's what that's going to do. If you do, over a long period of time, over the period of a training program, you're gonna bump the level of your zone 2 ceiling higher and higher and higher by doing this. So training in zone 2 makes your tissue stronger, makes your systems more efficient, and all of that, which does also build your aerobic capacity. But you also want to just once a week, you want to go through that ceiling, and you want to push yourself. You want to get your body accustomed to producing lactate and get your system efficient at dealing with that as well, and also just bump that zone 2 ceiling a little bit higher. You can see here the zone 1 and zone 2 is very little. It's only warm up, and then I have spent quite a bit of time in zone 3, but I'm always trying to get to zone 4 as much as possible. Because I do use percentage of effort rather than percentage of heart rate max, my zones are set a little higher, and I'm always trying to get there. I know what number to look at on my watch, and then once I get there, I kind of just try and sit there and just try and operate at that level. So for me, it's to sit between sort of 155 and 160 kind of level, depending, or certainly for running anyway. That's where I try and sit. But one thing you do need to be aware of when you're exercising at this level is that recovery needs to be planned. So you've really got to be careful with the structure of your training week, and you need to put this workout when you have a little bit of time afterwards to recover. So there's the heart rate trace. Actually, as I've gone up and down, you can see the length of time that I've put in effort for. They're relatively long efforts. I spoke about it in the previous video. When you're doing intervals as a Comrades runner or a really endurance athlete, you want to be, when you pick up your effort, you want to be going for a really decent time. There's no point in really running 400s on the track. It's not going to give you a lot of benefit. But doing 1 or 2K intervals or 1500s or something like that, that's certainly the duration that you want to look for. And then if you are doing hills, you want to look at longer hills that you can drag up and down. And you can see here from the green that's now on the screen, this was a hill workout. So as I said previously, it's not hard for me to find elevation gain and loss, and I've got some hills that I can run up that are well over 1 kilometer, and I can drag up and down the hills. And again, what you're doing there is you're getting accustomed to the load that Comrades will put on you. When you're doing the recovery on the way down, you try and run the downhills with as little effort as possible, practicing that technique. But you don't want to make that downhills too steep. You want them to be gradual. And you practice that running technique on the way down, trying to run really efficiently, trying to get your heart rate down so that by the time you turn at the bottom and run back up, that you're ready to go and lift that effort level again. So yeah, and if you're running flatter intervals, the distances I refer to are, it's better to be longer. And if you're doing fartleks as well, a minute fartlek, not really so much benefit. You want to be doing longer duration speed work. So there we go. That's the ideals that I've just spoken about in terms of your duration. And then when you're running your hills, it is going to help you build strength and power. And it's just really important there that, again, your contact point, get your contact point as close to underneath your hip as possible and push back behind you. The phrase that often comes up is the power in running comes from behind you. So yeah, you really don't want to overstride and get that foot out in front. You want to get that foot down underneath you and be pushing backwards behind you, and practicing a good technique with nice high hips, a nice upright chest and square shoulders with a slight forward lean. And running these types of workouts will help you with that. Then this is a time trial type workout. So I'm just trying to move. Can't find my cursor. So this is a time trial type workout. So I have the actual time trial squared off in blue there. This wasn't a running activity, by the way, but it just does show the kind of heart rate trace really nicely. Again, so top right, you can see how long I spent in my various zones. So I did have a nice long warm up, building my heart rate steadily through that warm up, getting my body ready to put a lot of effort in. And then when we started, what actually happened here, you can see my heart rate goes up a little bit too high, and immediately then falls back down. So now why does that happen? That happens because, there it is there, that happens because I'm starting to produce lactate, and my body immediately kicks in and regulates that effort level, and you get a little bit of a slump immediately afterwards. What happened there is I was trying to chase after a group that was just a little bit quicker than I was. Because there's a bit of benefit in that, didn't quite manage to make it on and get helped along by that. But then what did happen is very quickly a second group reformed, and that area there with the blue arrows where the second bunch, we got together and we started to be able to help each other along. And it just shows you the psychological impact of being together in a bunch and working with people, having a bit of a motivation, how that helps. Because my heart rate's dropped off there as I've dropped off the bunch that I was trying to stay with. And then as soon as the second bunch reforms and we start to be able to work together, I start to be able to pick my heart rate back up again, and then sort of race pretty steadily at a really high intensity for quite a while before it starts to drop off again. So this is really relatively short duration. You know, we've got lactate production and you've got the consequences of that. You are improving your VO2 max dramatically, but there is a really long time required in recovery, and you need to be really, really, really careful with that. So there's all that zone 4 activity that I've circled, and that has a really, really heavy consequence. It gives me a value of 3.8, and you can see it tells me I'm improving my VO2 max because I'm sitting in that zone 4 for a large portion of this workout. But that is a really, really high exercise load. And if you're going to do that in Comrades training, you really have to be careful with it, and you have to schedule your rest for after a workout like this. I don't do workouts like this during Comrades prep. I'm not saying don't do a time trial, but what I'm saying is you've got to do it at a lesser intensity. Here's some data from Comrades Day, and you can see that on this was a really well planned Comrades Day, and you can see that it gives me a total value over a well managed Comrades Day of 4.5. That Comrades Day was 9 hours, and over a workout that took less than, I think it's the one that's on the screen is less than 50 minutes. It gives me 3.8. So to train really hard like this at a really high intensity, by the way, I'm a relatively competitive canoeist, and my training is really differently structured when I'm training for canoeing. It's a lot more high intensity work because we race at a high intensity because the duration is completely different. And this would have been a workout that I would have done in preparation for that. So yeah, it can really put a lot of load on your body and requires a lot of recovery time. And hence, when you're in really, really high mileage training, you don't want to do this too often. It's really not a good idea. It will, your VO2 max actually really isn't that important on Comrades Day. It's just your ability to be efficient and grind out energy and just sustain impact for a long period of time that's going to get you through Comrades. Your VO2 max it does help, but it's relatively unimportant, and you're going to bump your aerobic capacity up through other means, through your once a week interval workout, and just by spending loads and loads of time in zone 2 and making that system really efficient. You want to avoid the really high loads of this type of training. Then the last one that I've got on the screen is really something that is almost to be completely avoided during Comrades training. You can see here again, this is my own data. I'm not really too sure what activity I was actually doing on this day. I don't know whether it was a paddle or a run or what it is. But you can see from the duration, it's about 2 hours 20. And you can see it is my data. So you can see that what I've done there is I've gone quite hard off the start and then quite conscious of not going too hard. But I'm racing at a really high threshold level. So I'm trying to keep my intensity level at about 80%. I'm not necessarily checking my heart rate monitor all the time. I'm quite experienced at this. I've been a lifelong endurance athlete with a lot of practice at this, with a lot of through a lot of disciplines. So I know what it feels like to kind of race at that 80% level. And I've done a pretty good job here. But this is what you want to avoid during Comrades training. So I've mentioned before, Comrades is a selfish mistress. If you do this, so you pick a 21 or something like that, or an elite marathoner might, for example, race for this kind of a duration. Those guys are racing for between just over 2 hours and 2.5 hours. So similar race duration to this. But if they go hard like this in Comrades training, it's just going to require too much recovery. So you really can't do this when you're in Comrades training. You're racing at a really, really high heart rate. You're sustaining that threshold for a long time on that boundary zone between aerobic and speed tolerance zone. There's a lot of lactate production, and you really, really have to manage this because if you go too hard, you're just going to come crashing down. So you're going as hard as possible for a relatively long duration. When I'm in the right condition and have trained and built up my ability to this, I can do it for about 2.5, maybe heading towards 3 hours. But as you can see on this particular day, you can see that over time, my average heart rate is coming down. I've maybe just gone a little bit too hard. So what's happening there is there's a slow drop off in average heart rate over time, and my average heart rate comes down as a consequence of that. So you really, this is an example of managing yourself on race day. So your heart rate's not going to be the same level on Comrades Day, but you actually want to achieve the same kind of shape where you can just sustain it and keep it going at the same intensity level the whole day, manage your energy level output, manage the systems that your body is using, and be aware of what you should be feeling like the whole day. In the beginning of the day, it's going to feel way too easy. You're going to want to go faster. But if you really are aware of it and you've trained your systems well, your systems will have the efficiency and you'll be able to keep going through the end of the day. It's very easy to do this. Sorry, I'm just looking. There we go. So on when you're racing at this kind of threshold, so you're going really hard. So say, for example, an elite marathoner, right? Let's say it's not me. If he just goes a little bit too much harder, and that heartbeat goes sort of 5 beats per minute average. So you go from sort of being around about sort of 160 there, and you push it to 165. Even just making a little bit of an error with that, and going a little bit beyond that 80% zone, what it's going to mean is that you start suddenly producing a lot more lactate. That metabolite then accumulates in your body. Your energy systems have to adapt as a result. You use up your fuel a lot quicker, and then boom, everything comes crashing down and you end up crawling along at the end of the race. Um, I've put up a good example here where I've managed myself relatively well, but you know, this happens often when racing really hard like this. It's really, in a race, it's really difficult to manage yourself like this. In an ultra, you can't make this mistake. You have to be able to make it towards the end of the day. And that's why, guys, when you get to the end of an ultra, when you have managed yourself well, you can keep running at the same speed that you were running the whole race, and you overtake thousands of people. And it feels like you're going much faster, but when you actually look back at your data, you haven't really accelerated. All you've done is managed yourself well and managed to keep going at the same speed for longer than everybody else has. Because most people, when they do this, they end up doing what the blue arrow does, and they end up running huge positive splits, and you lose a huge amount of time. So, you know, doing the right kind of workouts in training will make you aware of how you should feel. It'll make you aware of what the numbers on, you know, whatever device that you've got are, and how you should feel like, and then you prepare yourself for on race day, and able to manage yourself well on race day so that you can execute well. So that's what I'm planning to speak about in the next video. So that'll be some examples of some days where I've used everything that I've done in training successfully. Trust me, there are plenty of other days where things have come crashing down and I haven't managed myself well. And I found, particularly on multi-day stage races as well, when you make a mistake on one day, and watching the epic coverage year on year, you know, it happens to those guys too. You know, elite marathon mountain bikers, the best in the world, where they find themselves in a really good position on a particular day, and they put a little bit too much effort in on one particular day, and then, you know, they might win the stage or do really well that particular day. And then the guys who have got the end game in mind, they hold back, they manage their intensity level, they manage their metabolisms and the way they are using the energy, and they manage their recovery time. They then able to recover better overnight. And what happens the next day? The guys who've put too much effort in the previous day and maybe won the stage and got coverage for their sponsors and whatever, but they end up getting blown away, and in the general classification they fall off and end up behind as a result of their bad day. Tour de France cyclists, that's another example where you see this happening. So yeah, but you know, Comrades might be a single day endurance event, but really the same thing does apply. You've got to make sure that you are, well, first of all, you've got to make sure that you've done the mileage, that and staying in zone 1 and zone 2 for most of your mileage. They call it the 80-20 rule. So you've got to spend, for a trained endurance athlete, you've got to spend about 80% of your time in zone 1 and zone 2, and then for only 20% of your total weekly time are you then allowed to go harder. For somebody with less experience, I would say that's even less. So you can even shift that to 90-10. I've recommended running harder only once a week. Obviously, if that run, you know, if you're doing 80 Ks a week, which for a lot of people, that's pretty tough. You know, a lot of guys who are running maybe 10 and 11 hour Comrades, that should be kind of where you're sitting mileage wise. And that is what it takes to do a comfortable 10-hour Comrades. I would say is probably an 80K week. You know, once a week running for a total of an hour is probably going to give you a 10K. So that's going to give you just over 10%. So where's the rest of that 20 going to come from? Well, that can be your tempo runs. So I couldn't find a good example of this because I haven't done endurance training for quite a while, and it's still a little bit early in my build up to my marathon to have done one. I'm still trying to build up my tolerance to mileage. So I'm at the moment, I'm a bit worried that doing a tempo run is going to add too much load to a single workout. But what you want to do for a tempo run is, you know, it might be a sort of a medium duration run that you're doing very slowly for most of it. And then you're just going to spend about 20-25 minutes near the end, just picking it up a little bit, maybe running at your, whatever your potential marathon pace is, maybe running at that kind of pace. And you just pick it up at the end for maybe 20 or 25 minutes, but then leave a little bit of time at the end of your workout and back it off and go a bit down so that you can work, so that you can warm down and that you give your body enough time to circulate all those metabolites out of your, where you don't want them sitting, and pump them around and get them to all the places where your body deals with all the nasties, like your liver and your kidneys and things like that. Yeah, so doing a tempo run is where the remainder of your intensity can come from, and that you don't want to really be doing too much high intensity. That single interval workout, that should be where the high intensity comes, where you're pushing through zone 3 and into zone 4. As I've said to you, the last 10 or 15 years, the kind of science is going that way. We're actually aiming not to spend too much time in zone 3, and you want to try and work through that ceiling and blow it all the way through and get to zone 4. But yeah, your tempo run is where the remainder of, or another type of workout that you can do. Whether you want to do that by just going up a gentle gradient, and then maybe running hard on some flats afterwards, that's a pretty good idea. And that'll be, for example, your longer midweek run, that hour and a half run that I showed, that is where you could do that. But you've really got to be careful with how you schedule all these different runs. If you're running, as an ultra runner, you're going to be doing two. When you're preparing for a marathon, you don't really need 2 back-to-back long runs on a weekend. But as an ultra runner, you are going to be doing 2 back-to-back on a weekend. So that means that your Monday kind of, if you're going to run on Monday at all, that's going to be a very, very easy run on a Monday, if not a rest day. And then, you've got a midweek longer run to think about, and you've got an interval run to think about as well. So generally, I would probably recommend those, if you're going to do a longer run on a weekend, or both your longer runs on a weekend, that longer midweek run and your interval run might have to go on back-to-back days with a rest day after it, and maybe a rest day on a Monday. So you might have 2 longer runs, Saturday, Sunday, maybe rest or a very light run on a Monday, and then Tuesday, sort of a longer midweek run followed by an interval run on a Wednesday, which then makes Thursday and either a rest day or a very, very light run. Friday, kind of a normal run. You might go out for an easy hour or whatever. And yeah, you would structure your week around that. So be very conscious of your rest days. I find it works really well to try and run a bit longer on my running days and have more rest days. So at the moment, I'm trying to train 5 days and have 2 rest days. As I said, I'm in my marathon build up at the moment, hoping to do a marathon second week of May, and then have a few weeks where I can back it off a little bit before beginning Comrades training in June. Then that gives June, July, and most of August as the 3 months of block of Comrades training. But it does give me a base to work off. I know my VO2 max, having come through the paddling season at the moment, my VO2 max is sitting relatively high, and I am relatively well conditioned, although my legs aren't necessarily that well conditioned, but my body is. So I'm using that to go into my marathon, and kind of condition my legs over 7 weeks for that marathon, get that out of the way before the real meat of the Comrades training starts, but do a lot of elevation gain and loss during that period. Then early part of Comrades training, still concentrating on the elevation gain and loss. And then once you get into the real meat of your Comrades training, from 9 weeks to go until 3 weeks to go, don't worry too much. You should be accustomed to going up and down a lot by then, and you can just focus on the mileage. So that really is something that not too many people speak about when they put this stuff on YouTube, because there's not too much of it that's specific about Comrades. So yeah, that I believe is really helpful. and I will put together another one regarding a successful race strategy, but that one can obviously wait a little bit. But you do really want to execute that kind of thing in your training runs. So I won't wait too long before I put it together. Yeah, I mean, just this is what I'm spoiled with at the moment. Been running around in the forest on the trails and staying off the tarmac. So not so much pounding, but still doing a lot of work on the off-road. And yeah, I'll put together another one of these soon, and we will see you soon. If you've got any questions, by the way, just put them in the comments, and I'll try and address them in that last one.